the power that comes into the data center is now the limiting factor of how much compute you can do in that square footage. There's no question that data centers are going to get much, much, much smaller, which means that it's not land holdings that's going to affect what you're doing much anymore. It's going to be access to enough power to do what you need.
The world of AI, data centers, compute, and hyperscaling for many in the renewables sector represents an opportunity. It represents also the largest demand growth any of us have seen in our lifetimes. I am here at the Kite Rocket Lounge during Clean Power in Phoenix and had a chance to sit in on a session moderated by Jessica Fishman at Kite Rocket about how data centers are addressing these needs and how companies that are building the data center ecosystem are helping to ensure that we meet the stringent requirements. Ryan Abbott is the president of Southwest region for a company called Clayco Design and Engineering that is one of a very small cadre of companies that are providing these full wrap services for data centers. So I wanted a chance to give you some insight from that panel and dig a little further into what we as an industry need to think about to mature our understanding and our capacity for addressing these issues in data centers. Ryan, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. If I were to layer on one other thing we're doing is we're providing the built solution for that design and for the sourcing. So we're a holistic integrated service.
Yeah, it's I was trying to wrap my head around sort of how Clayco sits in the ecosystem, because on the panel was you and QTS and is it Equinix?
Mm-hmm.
Equinix and MGM. And two of those are data center sort of manager owners, right? I'm still actually trying to figure out what that overarching ecosystem is, but it became very clear through your conversation that you guys build these assets. Your job is to make sure that the shell goes up, the equipment has a clear design process that is going to optimize for what the customer, who is the customer a QTS or an Equinix, or is it a Google or a bit of the big seven?
It is all of the above.
All the above.
There are cloud providers that we work with direct. Often there are the Magnificent Seven that we are providing. They are a tenant inside one of our clients' buildings, and we're building to their specifications and their performance criteria. They all have different ways of doing what they do for a living, and it's our job to solve the grand challenge of their built form for them, right? So they come in and say, hey, I have to have this much compute on this date, and we work to that end all the way from the beginning to the end.
How long has Clayco been working at this? I know that you guys are in construction generally. So you're building a lithium-ion plant out in South Carolina, where I'm from. So it seems like construction is the core product for Clayco.
It's certainly where we started, was in the built solution, and we integrated where we said, hey, if we can provide an even greater level of service of taking the client challenge, formulating it into engineered and architecture solutions, and then supply chain and building those solutions, we could be providing a greater service.
Yeah.
The crazy thing about our industry is, like, most organizations work on such a narrow segment. Yeah. Right? What we're trying to do is widen that aperture and say, if we get the same level of understanding and how we do the calculation, the engineering, all the way through to making sure that it operates and commissions and does exactly what the client needs, like, how much can we remove and waste in the middle there, right?
Yeah, it's fascinating to me because in the solar industry, we deal a lot with construction. There are companies on both coasts that have deep construction background. So Solve, formerly Swinnerton, you're probably familiar with Swinnerton. Moss in Florida have built mostly, hotels and hospitals, and they're one of the largest solar contractors. But it occurs to me that by the nature of getting into data center and becoming a design build contractor in data center, it takes on an entirely new meaning. You don't see, to a certain extent, you do a little bit, but you don't see, like, by and large, contractors building these infrastructure assets going upstream in the value engineering to the point where they're, like, helping figure out problems with solar panels and inverters. I would argue that is true in certain cases, certain engineering firms. But that's what it sounds to me like when I listen to you guys on the panel. You have such a breadth of knowledge of everything from how and where the power is coming from to how the industry has evolved, that it sounds like you all have an engineering focus on delivering an optimized solution to your customer. And that's an entirely different, maybe it's not in principle, it feels like a different product. Our industry is trying to grapple with like, look, you got power needs, we got power.
Yeah.
Talk to me about your observations as someone who is trying to help your customer address the incredible power needs.
Yep.
And being at a place like Clean Power where there's an industry that is not tried to 5 nines.
Yep.
And doesn't have the track record to say we can absolutely provide the redundancy and the capacity factor you need.
Yeah, let me step backward a decade. And what most providers were trying to do was just standardize across their entire platform.
Yeah.
So they were working.
Providers are the data center owners.
Yeah, so they were working with major suppliers. They were working with major design firms. They were working with, like, at a macro scale that says, like, how do we optimize this so that it's got the same geometry, the same shape, the same inputs, the same process requirements. Like one of my operators could step into any one of our facilities and know exactly what's going on, how it works, and what maintenance cycle it needs to be on. So they were really optimizing for like that thing that they were providing, and then they were competing on that product, whereas everybody had relatively the same density or compute or PUE, but they were really saying like, okay, now I'm going to prefabricate, now I'm going to like build these modules, now I'm going to do this. Where we are today, like, so skip ahead a decade, now we are in the Sun Belt. I've got these external inputs. I have this much available on the grid. I need to do this for a substation. I have these other inputs. I have a solar input. I have district energy. Like, so here we are sitting at Clean Power, and this is kind of a neat one. The chilling capacity of the baseball field actually services and replicates the same thing that goes with the convention center.
Okay.
So all of the chilled water from the convention center and the baseball field, like, all back serve each other. So you've got redundancy, you've got backup. It also serves about 52 buildings in downtown through a district energy.
Wow. Okay.
So all of these high-rise buildings, they have a heat exchanger, they pull off like cooling capacity. They exchange that with hot water return. That hot water goes back to these central facilities. But that instills like what modern data centers are going to need to do. Right. So as you go through and you're now what we are constrained with on the geometry of a modern data center with how much heat rejection can you do on the roof?
Yeah.
Imagine now if you could put that energy back into the adjacent facility where they're using that heat for manufacturing.
I want to better understand what you mean. How much heat rejection we can do on the roof, meaning how much can we prevent heat coming from the sun penetrating the building?
So the compute generates heat.
Yep.
Years past, that heat would go into the air.
Right.
That air would get collected, like exhausted.
Yep.
That would go through essentially a radiator. That radiator would go back up to a chiller on the roof, and that hot air would get rejected out of the top of and honestly, not trying to dilute our conversation a bit, but it used to be adiabatic here, where you would use water, evaporate that water to, cool the then chilled water that was coming back into the facility.
Yeah.
All of those modalities have changed. I think what I'm pointing out is like this major evolutionary leap from what I standardized for everywhere.
Right.
And what I designed to be like a product line now needs to be customized to that particular place and time, that particular set of equipment that's coming in, those inputs for power and where we're getting power and power redundancy. I think the days at which we just said we went and bought a whole bunch of diesel generators and we're going to use those as the secondary power source
the redundancy,
on a facility, I think those days have passed in terms of those aren't necessarily the best solution everywhere all the time. What we're doing is we're saying, like, now given this very custom set of circumstance and this exponential curve on the technological adoption of the data center, we're now optimizing the engineering and the build solution to match up with that.
Yeah.
So think of it as in real time as opposed to form factors of the past.
the form factor of the past reminded me that we've been building data centers for few decades now.
Yep.
And we're in what seems like a foot race for interconnections and new build capacity. You made an interesting observation that as to think about renewables, solar, as the solar modules and the inverters have gotten more efficient, we've been able to pack more power density in the same footprint, and that the same effectively is happening in reverse in a data center. You're able to get more compute in a smaller footprint.
Yep.
I mean, it's essentially the same exact thing, but there's a different constraint on how much data center managers and owners can fit on a footprint. So I have kind of two questions. One is, why don't we see, and maybe it's happening, we just aren't aware of it, but like a massive retrofit of existing facilities? And this is going to feed into my question around how we are deciding where they're located. And then what are the constraints on new facilities with regards to power, given what we know about AI and compute?
No, great questions. Let me start with like what's coming. What's coming is the technological adoption, both in software and hardware, that allows you to stitch together multiple data centers. Network data centers are now, and there was a moment here where there was a lot of people in the data sciences that were saying this isn't possible, or we can't get our heads around it. We've now got proof of concept out there in the market. And so now, like, that is a huge input to where it's not necessarily what I can see on a floor plate that is a constraint for me. Now it's how many of these things can I stitch together, and how do I get that interoperability to where they know what each other's doing at any given time, right?
Right.
Okay, so like present tense, what's happening in the space is the power that comes into the data center is now the limiting factor of how much compute you can do in that square footage.
Right.
There's a really interesting nuance. We were talking about heat rejection on like now grabbing the heat generated in that compute and getting it out of the facility.
Yeah.
The technology that we have needs enough fresh air around it, needs enough, what we're going to call makeup air for the facility, and the geometry of those two things are affecting the size of a data center. But there's no question that data centers are going to get much, much, much smaller moving forward, which means that it's not land holdings that's going to affect what you're doing much anymore. It's going to be access to enough power to do what you need. Which,
if we think about renewables, can in fact mean land holdings.
Yeah. Yep. So it's the right? I mean, those are the two things that are happening in the inverse. Now, one more concept is where that data center is, and whatever the scale of that development is, and its adjacency to, let's say, renewable power, could matter more and more.
Yes.
The thing that I will say that's also super interesting to me is you think of Starlink as a great example of Wi-Fi from space. Mm-hmm. Where that happens, the compute happens, and then how you get that to space, right, really matters about geography, about having exposure to the southern sky, satellite placement to maximize its footprint on the Earth over massive populations. I mean, those are the factors that are going to make even more and more sense moving forward.
Right.
To where you've got a data center, it's sitting next to a redundant power source. Maybe that's a renewable, or maybe it's just a peaking power source that helps for the temperature control of the facility. It could be a number of different things. It could be, hey, I've combined cogeneration, which is I'm burning natural gas, I'm creating chilled water, I'm creating power, and I have solar, and I don't need a diesel generator. Like, those things all start combining together in interesting ways. Now, if you're turning that data stream up to space and then back down to the planet, like, it could be in a number of places. Right. And to me, that gets very exciting, right? That gives us the ability of having major contributions to compute for most of the world. And really what you need are now a source of a renewable, a source of, some sort of other generation, coupling the two together and building a very sophisticated facility.
Can you help me understand what co-location means? Because I thought I understood, and I've had a number of conversations today that seem to, it gives me pause.
It's changing. Yeah. So it used to be a facility that would house several different enterprise clients.
Okay.
So co-location meant I had multiple tenants in the same building. sort of like multifamily development,
yeah.
right? More families that live in the same building.
Yeah.
If we went backwards 4 years, 5 years, a big project used to be where an entity would take a floor of a data center.
Right.
Then it was a building, and now we've got single leases that are the entire campus, right? So 5 buildings are all under a single lease, right? And so it's not even co-location anymore, right? So that's all changing very, very quickly. And then as you get into this idea of coupled relationship between the compute that's taking place in a facility and their ability to do compute at that scale. And now we're sort of expanding it to be even broader than a campus scale, right? Where you're combining GPUs in multiple different places together. We're about to see something even different, right?
Yeah. So co-location doesn't have anything to do with the power resource?
No, like coupling is what I would call where you're using multiple power sources to serve your primary compute need.
Yeah.
And that can be a number of things. That can be like thermal, that can be geothermal if you're using that as a generated input, that could be solar, that could be, so what you're trying to do is achieve a balance of inputs so that you never have an off moment.
Right.
Even when the sun's not shining and
right.
even when the wind's not blowing.
Yeah. Why are we not building, given how important heat dissipation is?
Yeah.
It's kind of like solar, right? Like the coldest place on Earth is the best place for generating solar power. Like Antarctica is where you get the highest efficiency because it's 100% heat dissipation. So obviously Antarctica is a hard place to build. I imagine in our lifetime we might see it.
Energy's tough to create there though too. So So there's but
why are we building in Canada? Like there's an abundance of energy. Calgary is full of fossil fuel. Why are we seeing data centers in places like Arizona and not places like Alberta, Canada?
Political stability, the ability of securing it, the ability of having, the economics around the facility to get it constructed, access to a workforce, no natural disasters, really to speak of. Like there's nothing that could be more disruptive than you get something up and running and then now I've got a fire or a big event.
Not likely to see one in Miami anytime soon.
Yeah. I would say it's going to be a while before that happens. Maybe a sea, an underwater development there just to be close to the fiber optics that go under the Atlantic. But moving forward, I think that broadcast to space, having access to this, the sky, having the ability of having an energy footprint that's fairly affordable. I think those are all reasons that they should be in Arizona.
Yeah. And the heat, the relative heat doesn't matter at that point.
If you're in a modern data center, you're in the 90s. You're wearing shorts and a t-shirt inside of that facility.
Yeah. The outside heat doesn't matter.
The outside heat, of course, matters, but it's mattering less and less.
How?
Well, so now, like, picture this, you're now moving the heat away from the compute using chilled water.
Sure.
So that box within a box within a box, right, is where all of the heat generation.
So you're basically creating a cooler, you're creating an insulator.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the water intensity, because that is one of the biggest concerns from a climate perspective, that as we, I feel like we talk about how an AI search can be 5 to 10x the power consumption, but the water resource is not limitless either.
A lot of what we're doing today are air-cooled chillers here. Those air-cooled chillers are a closed loop. So once you fill them with water, they maintain the water that's inside of them. It's chemically treated and it comes back and forth. The same district energy loop for downtown is the same way. You've got chilled water coming in one pipe and hot water going back through a whole series of radiators, essentially. If you went back in time not too long ago, we were doing a lot of adiabatic cooling, which had an evaporative section and then a compressor section. And so we were evaporating a ton of water.
Yeah.
And there's still a lot of manufacturing facilities in Arizona that do. Mm-hmm. There's still some data center platforms that do, but like on a majority scale, everybody's now shifted over that says the restriction on water is not going to be an input moving forward.
Apart from power and water, what are the drivers, the data points that are dictating where and how these buildings are being placed?
Present tense and recent past was just the availability to enough power to do enough compute to make the capital expense worth it.
Yeah.
Moving forward, it's the regulatory, it's we talked about, the natural disaster, safety from a the lack of natural disasters. How about that? It's access to the distribution of your compute. I mean, those are the things that are going to matter more. I think we're going to see an influx of really creative use of cogeneration.
Yeah.
So cogeneration is using natural gas, power a turbine. That turbine is also a chiller, so you can create both thermal energy as well as create, electrons for your compute all at the same time. I think that's going to be a bridging strategy that ultimately will get us to when we can adopt small nuclear and other inputs that allow us to offset renewables. So
Now you're talking. Yeah. Do you have high hopes for small modular nuclear?
I do. And if I look at what's going on in China and India today, super exciting, where they're on a 4th generation fail-safe product. They're proving that technology now, and it's not too long before we recognize, like, just even for the sense of national security, like, we have to be adopting and generating power at a similar scale.
We touched on renewables and even nuclear. One of the interesting points that was brought up was the potential that fuel cells hold. Can you talk about some of these alternative options that have now been sort of road tested and being integrated into data centers at the time?
We've got several designs in our building right now that have geothermal as an input.
Yeah.
Right. So
For power. Huh.
So that's where you're circulating water into the ground. It heats. As it heats, it comes up, it expands, turns a turbine. That turbine generates power.
Yeah.
That power fuels your facility. What's really neat about that is, so you end up with like this stable, doesn't matter what time of day it is,
firm power.
Doesn't matter like what day of the week it is, doesn't matter what else is going on around it. It's just always producing. Now to couple that with when you have like the heat of the day load on the building and being able to produce and offset that by solar.
Yeah.
So those things travel together, right?
Yeah.
So if the sun's on your roof, even if it's a highly efficient roof, it's still generating heat. When that's happening, you're generating electricity to offset it.
Yeah.
Like, beautiful, like, relationship there, right? If it's a cloudy day and you're not getting heat on your roof and you're not generating as much power, that's fine too, right?
Yeah.
Those are the things that are in our house right now. We are looking at a lot of generation using natural gas as a primary and a secondary input for data centers.
Interesting. Do you feel like that's a stopgap?
I think that's a stopgap. I think that's a proven technology that's out there in the world that's being deployed in a lot of places, like R&D facilities, life science campuses, hospitals, right? And novating that to data centers is a pretty simple equation.
Yeah. So your business model for Clayco has evolved quite a bit as the data center industry evolves. Where are you seeing, one of the takeaways that I thought was quite interesting for your participation on the panel was how the ground is shifting underneath the feet of these major industry players like Equinix and QTS. What are the evolving business models that you see disrupting the way the industry, including how Clayco interacts with it, is working right now? And so were there any other observations that stood out to you about the conversation that was had in the...
Yeah, if I give you like something that like I wake up thinking about is Thomas Friedman in his book, Thank You for Being Late, he was talking about Apollo's curve, where he's saying like technological adoption is happening on an exponential curve.
Yeah.
Right. So it's coming up like the way that we're all thinking, educating, expanding, and inventing is all linear, and the two are getting further and further apart.
Wow.
Everything that I'm trying to do is take the intellectual capital and apply it to those challenges of closing that gap. So like anytime I have one part of our business emailing another one, or you know what I mean? Like anytime we have like something getting thrown over a wall, I know I'm not keeping up with that exponential curve. And so by combining those super smart people to say, here's the grand challenge for the client. Here's a solution that we've sourced the materials. Here we've designed around those sourced materials. We've got the economics to where they're captured and understood. And now we can maintain a greater speed to market for them. Like, I'm going to be super successful, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whose fault it is. It just matters that we can come up with a solution that works. And as long as I can keep everybody focused on the dynamic of that, like, we're going to be really successful. We know that what tomorrow needs us to be is not going and building a module over and over and over again. It's like there's a custom solution that needs to be derived for that particular place on Earth, this particular time, those particular inputs, and that's what we're working on.
Well, there's lots of folks listening who are working on building, owning, and operating power assets that are increasingly getting closer to that capacity factor that looks more like firm power. So I'm encouraged that part of your thesis is that we are going to see a lot more renewables integrated into the data center ecosystem, and concur with you that it takes an element of like, prove it to me.
Yeah.
And the industry is in that. I think we're in that beta phase right now, proving it to the data center segment. Thank you for taking time to, after the panel, taking the extra time to sit with us here on SunCast.
Ryan. Of course. It was great to visit.
Ryan Abbott is the president of the Southwest region for Clayco Design and Engineering, a specialist in the data center segment and construction, the built environment generally. Look forward to learning more from you guys as well, and we'll drop links in the show notes for how folks can reach you. Is there any particular place that you like to be found if folks are applying?
LinkedIn is probably one of the easiest.
Amazing. All right. We'll connect folks there as well, and thanks for taking time to be here on SunCast.
Thank you.